Councilmember Bailey. Councilmember Kuhnhart.
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Here.
Sorry, I gotta get used to a new order.
It's close enough.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Here.
Mayor Andrews.
Here. And will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. The first item is open time for public comment. If anyone would like to raise an issue that it's not otherwise addressed on the agenda, please step up to the microphone. Thank you. Hi, Carla.
Good evening, everyone.
Colin.
Hi. Carla Condon, 5132 Paradise Drive, and I came to give you an update report on the Age-Friendly Intergenerational Center. I'm delighted to report on the status from the day one, from when we started at the end of April until yesterday. We have had 6,180 visits to the center's classes. So those are participants that have sat in a seat and participated in the programs that we've done. I attribute this to the low membership fee that we ask for the members. It's a tax-deductible donation, $25 for those that live in Corte Madera, 40 for those that live outside of Corte Madera, and those membership fees cover all activities for the entire year. That also doesn't count children. Children come free, so that we've got even more than that. We have been able to provide real quality programming, and we're able to do so with the donations and the grant funding that we receive. And I just feel that being able to offer such a low rate to so many people has made this really, truly affordable. We have members from every city in Marin County, not counting West Marin. But if we're counting Marin here, every single city is represented. We already have plans to expand our programming and look forward to doing that once we're given more space. One of our popular new additions to our programming is your fellow council member, David Kuhnhart, who has joined this small group that reads to preschoolers. And it's really terrific, and we officially welcome you on board, David. That is so great. Also, just today, I got an email from Marin Community Clinics saying that they would like to buy 20 memberships to provide their clients to help improve their fitness. And November 22nd is our big gala. Put it on your calendar, 5:30 till 7:30, music, food, fun, friendship, and we're also going to have enormous array of things to sell for holiday gifting, and I'm going to pass this around. Our advertisement appeared, kindness of the Nugget Markets. They paid for the ad. This is, I believe, the third time that we've appeared in the IJ, and I'll pass it around to y'all.
And isn't something going on the 18th?
On the, oh, That's not me, that's different.
Okay.
Okay, that's age-friendly Corte Madera
All right.
is honoring everybody in the town that's 90 or over at 2:30 in the main hall. We usually end up with not 100 people that are nonagenarians or centenarians, but 100 people, including their guests. And the public is invited, just as you all are on November 22nd. So everybody's invited. Come have some cake and honor those distinguished members of our community. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay. We'll next go on to the consent calendar. The purpose of the consent calendar is to group items together which are routine or have been discussed previously and do not require further discussion. It will be approved by a single motion. Any member of the town council, town staff, or the public may request the removal of an item for discussion. So,
Mr. Mayor, staff would like to request pulling a 4F,
A4F.
just 4F.
All right. Okay. Could I get a motion for,
Sure, I will move approval of items 4A through 4M, exclusive of item 4F.
Second.
Councilmember Bailey, Councilmember Kuhnhart,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazia,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman,
Yes.
Mayor Andrews.
yes? Peter?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. In an attempt to clarify a couple things, we provided a handout of the contract that we're using on the High Canal Embankment Repair Project. That copy of that contract has been placed in front of you. There's also copies in the back counter for any of the members of the public that are interested. That's just so you know which contract we're referring to. I know the action is to authorize the Public Works Director to award a construction contract, but we wanted to be specific about which contract we were referring to. We also wanted to be clear about a limit amount not to exceed. So we're asking that your action include a limit of $600,000 and an amount not to exceed. We believe that the engineer's estimate and all the work that has gone into it, I think in your staff report it's listed in the 400 to 450 range. We're pretty confident that that is solid. I think the 600 is an abundance of caution, just in case things come in above as expected. I don't know if Teresa, if you have anything to add.
Yes, I would recommend that you authorize, if you're going to authorize, that your motion be that the contract would be in the same form or substantially the same form as what the Public Works Director has provided you today, and if it's in substantially the same form, that it would need to be approved by the town attorney. That contract has been used in, it's the same form that's been used with respect to multiple construction projects, and so if there is going to be a change, as long as it's not a substantial change, then it would go forward, assuming you authorize the Public Works Director to enter into such a contract.
Okay. Any questions?
Are you expecting this work to take place in 2019?
We are.
Sort of before school starts.
We would like to do it before school starts. We have a bit of an issue with regards to the regulatory agencies that permit us to do this work. And that window is September 1st to October 30th. And so unfortunately, it doesn't coincide with getting done before school starts. But that's just one of the things that is out of our control.
Okay.
Will people still be able to use the High Canal Path while this work is underway, or is it going to be closed?
Most likely, it'll be closed for most of the construction work.
Okay, thank you.
Is there an alternative route that could get?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've set up a construction plan with detour routing and signs. The one downside of the routing is it's a bit out of the way. So if you're familiar with the area where the High Canal Path hits Lakeside, travelers will have to use Lakeside or Birch to get up to the Center Marker Trail and then move whichever direction they want to go on Center Marker.
The alternative is to avoid coming into the Madera Gardens neighborhood and stay on Tamil Vista and access the Center Market Trail that way.
Okay. All right. Good enough. Anybody want to make a motion? What? Oh,
Or, well, actually, no, I think, am I misleading you then? Are we-
No, because we pulled it, we have to have
Okay.
public comment.
Okay.
Yes, we
public
do.
comment, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any public comments? Any council comments?
There are none. I would move item 4F.
Second.
You can go ahead.
I'm going to make the suggestion that you move with a not to exceed value of
600?
600,000 and in a contract that is in the same form or substantially the same form as approved by the town attorney as the contract that the Public Works Director just put before you.
Okay, let's see. I would like to move item
You can-
4F with a not to exceed value of $600,000 on a contract that is in the same form or substantially the same form as a contract already approved by the council.
Second.
Councilmember Bailey. Councilmember Kuhnhart.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Andrews.
Yes. The next item is 5A, public hearing to review information, receive public comments, and to consider, one, introducing ordinance number 988, establishing a residential permit parking program to restrict non-residents from parking on residential streets that the town council may designate by resolution from time to time, and to consider resolution number 32/2019, establishing a one-year pilot program in Madera Gardens. Todd, would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. First, I'd like to let you know that this ordinance and staff report has been worked on by your town manager, the Public Works Director, and Jamie Parada from the town attorney's office. We've also worked closely with the superintendent and the principal of Redwood High School and the Tamalpais School District. They're both here today, Tara Tapier and David Soderheim. Thank you for coming. How many people are here for this? How many people have seen the staff report? Is everybody? For the most part? Okay. Okay. So brief background, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This issue for us really started this past school year, but this has been a long-standing issue for the city of Larkspur. The bottom line is we don't have enough parking spaces at the school property for the amount of drivers that we have that go. And the school district has worked really hard to pass some measures and policies to encourage commuting and I think have been really responsive to try to solve the issue. But again, we're limited in some of our resources. And so I want to point out as we go through this is one of the tools in the toolbox that'll assist us as a town and as a community. But it's not the ultimate solve to the problem. There's still work to be done, and your staff, both in Corte Madera, the Larkspur staff, the Central Marin Police Authority chief, the school district, and the principal, we're working together this school year to really see if we can find some common ground, some opportunities to maybe put money together to try to help us find additional parking spaces. Ultimately, we're not going to find parking spaces for all of the kids, the drivers, but if we can reduce it by any percentage, it's a win for us. So I just wanted to really kind of set the stage of what we're talking about and what we're working on. In early March of 2019, town staff began receiving complaints from residents in the northern portion of the Madera Gardens neighborhood. And really what happened, and this is really the first school year, I think there's a number of reasons why, but really I think the students found kind of a shortcut. It was a perfect opportunity for them to park in a residential area, walk to school quickly, and at lunchtime get back to their cars and get, kind of beat that log jam that happens before school, at lunch, and after school to kind of get to the shopping centers and to the restaurants. What it did is it really caused a really unique issue for our neighborhood in Madera Gardens. The northern end of the Madera Gardens neighborhood is really tucked away in away from the major arteries of the town of Corte Madera. So what happens is when one of the students is trying to get to their car at lunchtime, they're already 5 to 10 minutes late on a short amount of time. And so what they're doing, what we found, is they're driving, I'll say dangerously, through our neighborhoods. There are line of sight issues. It caused a lot of safety, line of sight, and really quality of life issues for our neighborhood here, specifically on the northern end of Madera Gardens. We also had some negative contacts. The kids weren't always positive interactions with some of our residents on maybe littering, talking loud, parking in the middle of a driveway, on a corner. There's a lot of issues. So staff started evaluating this in the spring, started talking to the school district, really included Larkspur on this, and really try to see if we could find some solutions. As we headed into the end of the school year, again, we grabbed some of our core residents in the area, George Marsh and Jim Robinson. Jim, as you know, is a retired town manager in the town. And really, we brought them to a meeting with the school to meet with the principal and really see if we could kind of really talk this out, problem solve, see if we can find some solutions. Following that meeting, the Larkspur city manager, myself, and the police chief met with the Redwood High School principal and the Tamalpais superintendent to see if we could work internally to try to solve and help as strategic partners to try to solve this. And again, that's something that's a work in progress. But what really became clear as we went through this process of discussions, we needed to do something and we needed to add a tool for our toolbox, and it's this. I think this ordinance allows us flexibility specific to a neighborhood with specific issues to quickly respond by resolution to help the neighborhood. On June 25th, staff, in conjunction with the city of Larkspur, held a community meeting at the community center. We noticed neighbors in both Corte Madera and Larkspur that are impacted by this to really get their feedback. If we did a parking ordinance, to really get their feedback of what they think of it, if there are any improvements that we could make. I think it was a really positive meeting. It helped us a lot in formulating this ordinance. And really, I think what you see now in this ordinance is really a culmination of that work of staff, the school, and the local neighbors. One of the things this also allows us to do, and you can see it on page 18 of the staff report, it's also on the screen, we recommend, based on the time it takes to walk into the school district from the Madera Gardens neighborhood, to start small and work our way out if necessary. Staff has walked the area, and in green, highlighted green, is what we're recommending that we start with for this resolution and this parking permit plan. If you agree, we're basically going to follow, Larkspur will follow suit with us. As you know, there's portions of the roadway that are both Corte Madera and Larkspur, and so we will try to be consistent between both jurisdictions. The fiscal impact, upfront costs could potentially be about $10,000 of enforcement, doing the permits, overseeing the program, any appeals. We're requesting at this time that the town take on those costs, that we do not charge our local residents at this time. Let's see how this thing goes after the first year. I believe that it'll be cost recovery, fully cost recovered, and so I don't think it's necessary to charge our residents. But we'll try a one-year plan and see how it is, and we'll report back to the council at that time, should we have to continue. One of the things of ease of this program, we're recommending that this isn't a year-to-year annual request to get a permit. This is something that we would allow these permits to stay in place for up to 5 years, a longer period of time. Again, just lowering our administrative time and helping residents as well. One of the things we heard from the residents in the workshop, and it's, again, I'll point you to the fact sheet. It's attachment 3, page 19. And it's the frequently asked questions that came up as staff worked through this and as the residents asked questions. Basically, if you have a registered vehicle in this neighborhood, whether you have 2 or 4 vehicles, you would get that amount of permits. The permits are attached to a permit number and that vehicle. And so that's how we're going to handle this. We're not going to give out, our intent is not initially day one to give out visitor parking. One of the things we're going to ask residents to do in this neighborhood would be, if you're going to have visitors during school hours, again, this is something that we're going to restrict parking during school hours. And so if you had visitors, would be if you had a parking permit, park your car in the street, allow them to park in the driveway. In those unique situations where you have your kids coming into town from college and they're going to be there for a few weeks, then we have a mechanism in place where we would allow that. It would be a temporary parking permit specific to that vehicle. One of the things that didn't surprise me, but that is out there, it's the black market of permits and allowing parking spaces. We were told by some residents, that they had offers from their fellow friends and parents to say, hey, if you let me park in your driveway, I'll give you $500. And so you can imagine how much a permit would be worth. And so, again, permits follow vehicles. The appeal process would be by written declaration like we normally do. It goes through the Central Marin Police Authority. However, the City of Larkspur and the Town of Corte Madera, through the Public Works Director and the managers, we're going to take this as a case-by-case basis. And again, we're not going to be, if you're a resident in this neighborhood and you did get a parking ticket, or as one of your friends did, we're obviously going to be very laxed and steer our way towards the residents. We believe that if this is to proceed, what we would like to do is work with the school to send a letter out to the parents letting them know about this parking permit program, and really educate, give warnings, because again, this ordinance wouldn't be in place necessarily day one, so it gives us some time to educate and give warnings, and then we would enforce. We believe within the first few weeks of enforcement that I think we would get a good response, and this isn't something I see we're going to have to go out and enforce every day, but there'll be periods of the time of the starting of the school year when you see an influx from the sophomores and juniors when they get their licenses. You're going to see issues where then we have to jump in and jump on the enforcement. So really building, and I think we have a good leadership team with the residents in this neighborhood of that constant communication and the feedback. If it does bleed outside of, you have now the broken line here in the neighborhood, you could see possibly we might have to extend it a little bit farther, and if we do, we can do it within 2 weeks by resolution, and we can immediately move forward. Signage is at the ingress and egress of the neighborhood. Peter did a really good job of kind of picking this area here because we can do it at the entry points. You're entering the residential area. It's a permitted program. You don't have to line signs up all the way down the street. We only need a handful. And again, they're consistent with enforcement for CMPA and Corte Madera and Larkspur. Again, I think there's going to be things that come up that maybe we didn't think about. I think the fact sheet is a good start for residents and the council to look at and staff. But we're going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to be creative. The resolution process allows us to do that as we go. And so with that, I'm going to stop there. Peter wants to jump in and add anything, and we're happy to answer any questions as well.
Thanks, Todd. The only thing I would add is just to ask for your patience. This is the first time we've done this in Corte Madera. I've done it in a few other towns that I've worked in prior, and I will say that it's really difficult to envision all the potential outcomes and difficulties and hiccups, and so that's one of the reasons why we chose a one-year trial phase. I think that come one academic school year, we'll be back to you and we'll be able to tell you, here's what's working, here's what we recommend. So just, it's going to figure a few things out. And we tried to anticipate all the potential questions, but I think there'll be some that we don't anticipate that'll come up. So.
Always. But the programs between Corte Madera and Larkspur will be almost identical?
Correct.
Okay.
And Larkspur, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Larkspur is going to be just on the other side, over there, like Heather Gardens, that area. They'll be doing the same thing, exactly, same timing and all that.
That's correct. So last year, Larkspur passed an ordinance similar to this to allow flexibility, and that's exactly what they're going to do now. So they're going to add Heather Gardens, part of Birch, and I think, and the end of Birch, yeah. So we'll be consistent. We'll be consistent in our signs, our enforcement, and the ordinances. Streamlined.
CMPA can just wander in and do what they need to do.
Yeah, so we work with CMPA because one of the things came with the cost of doing something. And one of the things we had with the school district, of both Corte Madera talking with the school district, was, hey, if there's an opportunity to maybe find a small piece of land on property or somewhere to do analysis or to maybe have a gravel lot, like for us, we would take to our councils, let's share the cost 3 ways because it's in our best interest, because this costs money. This is real money. So on the enforcement side, We're going to use cadets, the police cadets. I talked to the chief. He's comfortable that he has the capability to do that on a routine basis. So we're going to use cadets, and if necessary, we'll go to the police council, and maybe we might have to add an additional $5,000 or $10,000 to the budget. But we're comfortable that we don't think this is going to be a daily type of thing. I think it's going to be a handful of weeks a year that you're going to see intensive enforcement, and then it'll die down. But again, we're concerned that we don't want to just push the kids around. And so you're going to have to be strategic of, you do one thing, there's going to be a response, and we're going to have to be able to be really creative and quickly respond to those changes as we go, as Peter said.
One of the questions that came in just today, I think from resident Mary Conley, I thought had some good, very specific questions. What do we do with the visiting piano tuner, plumber, home health aide, service provider, landscape, especially if it's let's say a vehicle with a small trailer or a larger vehicle, it's the electrician or something. I think I heard you say, well, we're encouraging residents to bring those visitors into their own driveway, but
Yeah.
is that going to be appropriate at all times with that type of?
It's not. So part of in the fact sheet, if you look, there's a few exemptions. So for instance, ADA is exempt. So if you have a placard, you don't need a permit. You can park wherever you want, right? So they're exempt. On the commercial side, yes, the intent is of the ordinance, if you're doing work in the town of Corte Madera and you have a business license, we're going to ask that you post the business license in the window for enforcement for the officers or the cadets to know you're exempt. There's some uniqueness, though, as the example Mary gave. What about a nurse that comes routinely? Well, you're not necessarily going to have a business license in the town of Corte Madera. So in those cases where we have routine type of people coming in, we're going to want to know that in our applicational coverage. Do you have any special circumstances where you have visitors? And in those cases, we will give a permit. And we'll be flexible, and we're going to have to be a little bit creative there.
Just to add, Councilmember Kuhnhart, in the second whereas clause of the resolution, we attempted to address this, where we talked about prioritizing the parking of residents, their guests, and their contractors. So we used a catch-all phrase. The intent, again, as Todd mentioned, is not to penalize people who have folks come to their house. So we're going to show a lot of leniency there. And because we're also in charge of the enforcement, we can give direction to our enforcement officers or the cadets on what to look for.
There was one commentary or a letter that said, we don't want this, and without any explanation. I was wondering if you've, in person, received any explanations from those who might not want this program.
I think the concerns that I heard on the workshop, and Peter can jump in, and a lot of residents are here, they can speak to it. I think some of it of like the signs, are we going to have a lot of cluttered signs all over the place? They don't really necessarily, I don't think anybody likes to restrict parking in your neighborhood, right? Because you have people that visit. It does take work and communication. No one's excited about it, I don't think. But where I really got the negative, hey, I don't want that, I think it's from some of the parents that have students that go to Redwood High School that live in Corte Madera, even the area. You even have some parents that live in the neighborhood that don't want this because they want their kids to be able to park a little bit closer to school. So that's been my feedback, but Peter, feel free to jump in.
The other thing is, those in the neighborhood are pretty familiar with Apache and Birch, and most of the parking we saw last year was along Apache and around the corners of Lakeside and Birch. You can't just do the permit in those areas where people are parking. There has to be a walking penalty. So the folks, let's say you're down here, no students are parking in front of your house, and now you're part of this program. You got to get a permit. You got to make sure your guests. So if you live outside of the impacted area, there's some rationale to not support the project that I can think of. But again, if you only do it where people are parking, then it's squeezing the balloon, and yeah.
Good analogy.
Are we going to be taking actual testimony from Redwood High, or can I advance a question or two in anticipation of that?
Sure. So the school, both the principal and the superintendent are here because they're good partners and they support staff and the town and the residents. I don't think they're expecting to speak, but if you had questions of them, they're certainly happy to do so.
Well, I guess the obvious question is, are there any changes in the program for the new school year? because last year's program obviously changed with the support, by the way, of the Safe Routes to School Committee. So if there are changes, and can there be an increase in the number of carpool spaces so that can really encourage students to get together and collaborate to solve this issue instead of single occupant vehicles?
I think the principal can speak to that if he would like to, but I will say as we go, I think it is going to be a work in progress for staff and the principal, the chief, to go opportunities where we can do things like that. We've had over a decade great partnership to problem solve and work towards that. So with that, Principal Sondheim.
Yeah, I think David Sondheim, principal at Redwood High School, I think the two things we're looking at most closely for this year are trying to add spaces wherever we can. That may be limited, but we see one area in particular we may be able to add a few. The other one is trying to reduce the number of spaces that aren't used due to absences or students or staff coming and going. And so we're looking at a couple options there as well. Anything significantly in terms of additional parking spaces is going to be a longer term process at best, and is limited.
I think I have a related question. My question was just going to be, what is the genesis of this problem? I mean, we see here that we started receiving complaints in March of 2019, and we see that these issues are new to Corte Madera neighborhoods. What changed?
Larkspur enforce their laws.
So a lot of, so I was police chief in my past life, but I've worked in law enforcement for 22 years here. I'm familiar with the issues around the school. I say issues around the school, just parking issues like anywhere, right? If you have a school in a residential area, you're going to have parking issues. It's just the fact of life. We don't have enough parking spaces. Where this really started to be, normally where the issues were historically on Riviera Circle across from the, we saw a lot of students would park there a lot. And so we've had a lot of, the signage went up. There's a lot of different things that Larkspur tried over the years. But really what started to move vehicles around was when Larkspur redid Doherty Drive, and they didn't allow parking any longer on Doherty Drive. Think about like the number of cars that would be parked out there on any given day. Those started to move around, and they started to move around from Riviera Circle to the Heather Gardens neighborhood and to William Avenue, right behind San Andreas. And so that's what started it. I think some of the positive, we don't want vehicles, students leaving at lunchtime and racing through our neighborhoods. And I think there's some good policies that Redwood High School passed, but part of it in conjunction with maybe some of those policy changes. And I just think, I talked a lot with the chief about this, I just think a couple of the students who lived in the Madera Gardens neighborhood and word of mouth found the perfect spot. They really did. I mean, it's never been an issue before, so I think it's a culmination of things, and it's over a period of a couple years, actually, of just them, students being really good and trying to find the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. And I'm surprised they didn't find this neighborhood before. So I think it's a culmination of factors, and I can't really just put it on, hey, the school district changed a policy over, last year, and that's why it caused this. Originally, I felt that way, honestly, but in talking to the principal, talking to the chief, and really sitting back and evaluating this, I think it's a number of things. Mm-hmm. So I know it doesn't really answer your question, but I really do think it started with some changes, and they put up signs, but they didn't really enforce them on Riviera Circle, but you did move people from Riviera Circle and Doherty Drive to Heather Gardens to William, and it just moved its way to us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. My understanding was that there was a new Redwood High School policy that students who park on campus are not allowed to leave campus at lunchtime. Principal Sondheim, you may be able to speak to whether that's true. But if so, I could certainly see how a policy like that would hugely exacerbate this problem of students parking off campus in order to be able to go, to a local restaurant at lunchtime. So my question is, A, is my understanding that correct? Was there that policy change? And B, I think, was that considered as a ramification when this policy was being discussed?
So, yes, it is the case that we changed our policy a year ago and prevented students who were parked on campus from leaving on campus, and that was completely for safety reasons. I don't think that was actually significant impact in any of this. I think the biggest impact is we are bigger. We are 50% bigger than we were 8 years ago. And I think that's probably the biggest factor, along with what Todd was talking about. That said, we had currently students who park on campus can't leave. It was kind of like that before anyway, in a lot of ways. But we have enough students who, because there are spaces out in the community, do try and drive in, park off campus. If they're close enough, then they can still leave at lunch. And I would guess that this will reduce that because they're going to be too far away to actually get away at lunch. They can still walk at lunch, they can still bike at lunch. But we didn't want their cars leaving because of the safety issues that we've seen and heard about as long as I've been principal, and I think long before that.
Okay, yeah, I graduated from Redwood High School 8 years ago. I think you were probably my principal for some portion of my time there. We always, parked on campus and would drive off campus for lunch
Right.
a fair amount of times. I'm not aware of any safety issues that may have happened, but it's entirely possible that there were issues happening that I was not aware of. But my point is that I think you spoke to sort of the timing of this new policy. So, if, you said that this policy changed last year, and it was, at the beginning of this year that we begin to have these issues. It seems to me curious that these sort of previous, sort of long brewing changes in where people are allowed to park would be a bigger factor in this sudden problem than an abrupt and, in my eyes, pretty significant policy change. I think, the policy does obviously create an incentive for students who want to eat off campus to park off campus. And I'm just concerned about the process that led to this policy change and the impact that it's having on residents. I don't want to get into the discussion portion of this right now, so I may stop there, but I would love to discuss this in a few minutes.
Can I just jump up with one more to your question and answer? And Principal Sondheim, how many parking spaces to drivers do you have? Aren't we short about 200 spaces or something like that?
Oh yeah, we're short a few hundred, and every parking space on campus has been used and permitted and used throughout the years I've been there.
So to the question, my original response when I started working with the residents in the neighborhood, I put it solely on your question, exactly how you just referenced it, and that's how I actually came at Principal Sondheim originally when we met. I'm like, it's because of your policy change. This is the issue why this is happening. But then when the chief walked me back a little bit and we started to go back a few years, you have 150 to 200 plus drivers that don't have spaces. And so regardless of what, I think that policy change is part of it. I think it's part of what found this, but I think we still have the overflow of just not enough spaces. What's the best neighborhood? Talking to the kids, we got on the feet, we're talking to the kids, why are you parking here? What's the deal? What's going on with the policy? And it's a combination of things. It's factor, absolutely, but I don't think it's the sole reason. One of the reasons why they went to that, and I strongly supported it when I was the chief, I always pushed the school to think about it. It is so dangerous at lunchtime with kids leaving campus. That's the safety. They race through Corte Madera and Larkspur to get to lunch and back. It's dangerous. It's just flat out dangerous. And I thought it was a good policy change. The chief was involved in that. The town of Corte Madera wasn't necessarily involved in that conversation. So we've talked about how we can better communicate in the future. But again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think it's a factor, but there's a lot of factors.
Sure.
Yeah, so.
Any more council questions?
I got one more.
Okay.
I think this is for Peter. This might not be a fair question, but I think it's interesting. What should we expect? You're the only guy who's actually been through this, and you've said we need to be able to move quickly, which I fully get, but what do you think we should be expecting might happen as a result of this? Because this is going to be a fairly major change if we do this.
The easiest and cleanest answer is that a year from now, you'll decide whether you want to make this project permanent or not, or this permit program permanent or not. And we will have a lot of information from there. The things that we don't know is how well the visitor guest issue is going to work out, how many people are going to want guest permits, connecting those to the vehicles, how well and how often people display the permits where we ask them to display them. How easy is enforcement? How burdensome is it? We don't know the answers to that question. We're trying to set up a minimalist administrative process. We don't have a lot of extra staff time, so if the administrative process is a little bit more than what we anticipate, it could become burdensome. So those are the things that come to mind for me. In terms of the efficacy of implementing the signage and alleviating what many residents around Birch and Apache would consider a quality of life issue, I think we can get at that question. But I think some of the auxiliary components of the program are going to possibly need some tweaking.
Thank you.
One question I have is in terms of town staff, who all do you think will have to be involved in it?
Well, I think a lot of us will be. You know, some of that is spelled out in the ordinance and in the resolution. I think Todd is an arbiter if there's disputes. The Public Works Department is going to be involved in terms of processing and getting the permits, as will the admin department. Code enforcement, we have a new code enforcement officer. He's going to spend some time out there. He's going to be authorized to write citations. So it's actually a lot of different departments that are going to be involved.
Okay. Good.
So in front of you, you have two versions of versions of the ordinance. One of which, on the front page, you'll see our red lines. This version is identical to what was in your packet. The only way in which this is different is it shows you the changes to the existing code. So substantively, it's identical to what was in your packet. The second ordinance, which looks the same, except there's no red print on the front page, actually contains a handful of very minor changes and updates to the version that was in your packet. And those handful of changes are shown in red line. They just don't begin until the third page. Most of them are very small, minor kind of wording issues, and in one case eliminated a delegation of authority to two people, which should have been to one person. But wanted to make sure you saw those. Staff is recommending that you proceed with considering adoption of the version that I just spoke about with a handful of minor changes. If you have any questions, I can explain that. Has no red on the first page, just a few red lines you'll see starting on page 3, I believe.
I guess we've got to go to public questions and comments right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Would anybody in the public like to make a comment or ask questions? Mr. Marsh? Okay. Please step.
George Marsh, Birch Avenue at the corner of Apache. Very highly impacted by this year's situation. I want to say, in reading what was provided to us, preparation for tonight, big thank you to town staff for having responded to our problem. It's so obvious. More work went into that preparation than I had thought would be needed. Myself and my neighbors, we thought, hey, would you just put up some signs for some permits required, and I would do it. But I see there was big work, and I want to thank Todd and Peter and everyone else who did big work. Thank you very much. But we deserved it because horrible situation. I call it an invasion of a neighborhood. That's what happened. I hope that's not a bad word these days.
It's a bad word today.
The bad word today.
I don't mean that kind of invasion, okay? Daytime invasion. So big thank you. I want to point out that it's heading for the middle of August. There's a lot of people out of town. And my neighbors, some of, who either are out of town or couldn't make it tonight, did mention to me how much they are looking forward to this relief and how much they are basically in favor of what they've heard about the plans. What was mentioned was, is this going to cost us anything? Is there going to be a fees for this? And I was under the impression, as I gather it is intended first year, no, not going to cost us. But I read a couple of maybes in there about future years. I just want to comment. We don't think it's a privilege to park in our neighborhood. We don't think it's a privilege to have the quality of life of Corte Madera town. So to defend against this unfortunate influx, daytime, noisy, difficult, dangerous, if the town has to respond and there are some expenses, town has to defend its residents. and costs would be very, I think, resented by the people being protected. I don't think it's a privilege we're asking for. So folks are on vacation. I wanted to say, too bad this won't be ready on day one of school. I'm going to borrow a phrase from one of my good neighbors who's in the room. If it's not ready day one, we don't want to habituate the students in this new school year that you can park there. So as soon as possible, please, I'm calling Todd's attention and anybody else. If it can't be ready day one, day two is okay, all right? But beyond that, it gets difficult. I want to say, but now that I heard the word cadet, are they called police cadets? What are they called, please? Until I heard that word, I was going to say I would organize a posse of neighbors to put notices on windshields, polite notices. Town can print them up. We'll put them out there as far as when it takes effect. In other words, we don't want anybody caught by surprise. But if there's police cadets and you're coming to look, that's okay too, of course. I wanted to respond to, the topic of expert. Yes, is there a time limit?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
about 30 seconds ago.
So this wonderful person has left here. Carla Condon, did she speak?
Yeah. Not on this subject.
No, but she spoke. And I watched the clock count down, and I saw that she ran out of time. But what she was saying was so significant that you all kindly gave her another minute or so. May I invoke the Carla Condon courtesy?
Who else wants to talk? Okay, we just had one Carla and many of your neighbors, so.
I just want to say, I want to, if I may, this matter of expert testimony. The principal of Redwood was up here a few minutes ago, and Vice Mayor Beckman brought up the issue of, well, wait a minute, isn't there really something quite different? Why this year? And he asked about the lunch
You've
chain.
gone on
Oh, I'm sorry.
much more than 3 minutes, so
Oh, I understand.
can you please yield to
Well,
your neighbors?
I'm on my way to sit down, but I'm
Okay.
saying that was one expert testimony. I have a different
I
expert
know.
testimony.
Thank
And
you.
I think he
Thank
was
you.
not correct.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak on the issue? Please line up.
Line up.
Thank you.
Just ask him all to line up behind the microphone, so we don't have to wait.
Hi, I'm Jim Collins. I live on Lakeside Drive, so I'm in the affected area by the green. As my neighbor just said, I think this was an outstanding presentation by the staff, and there's been a lot of thought that's gone into it. I'll try to keep this short. I think this gentleman's former experience as a police chief says a lot about the driving habits of our young people. I was a young person. I had a lot of fun in a car. But I think to address the sort of sudden nature of this is that it's like telling somebody about your favorite new restaurant or your best fishing hole. Once that word gets out, it's going to be crowded. You won't be able to get in anymore. And I think a lot of the neighbors here who support it, I'm not sure who they are, I support it, are experiencing that. And I think the foremost issue is the safety. And cars racing through BMWs, Range Rovers, you name it. I think this is a uniquely affluent problem. And the fact that the high school, my son graduated with honors, with AP credits. The high school's fabulous. It's run very well under a very hard situation. But this needs to be addressed, and I think it's abhorrent that we'd be encouraging single vehicle occupancy in our community and having kids race off to lunch when really we need to think about that. We're ready to fix the High Canal due to adverse climate conditions, and here we are trying to support driving around neighborhoods and parking in people's front yards. So thank you, everybody. That's all I have to say, and I'm fully supportive of the motion.
Hi, Jim Robinson, Ash Avenue, Corte Madera. I also support the motion. I appreciate the efforts that our staff has taken to date and the time and effort that has been done to put this ordinance together. This issue has had a long history. I attended the school board meeting when we had an interim superintendent 2 years ago, and also attended the Larkspur Town Council meeting, or City Council, several years ago, and expressed concern about their plans for new parking ordinance and what impacts that might have in the town of Corte Madera. At that time, we had like 5 cars on Apache. In the second year, we had almost 50 cars on Apache and Lakeside and Birch. So it was a major change. I think the town manager already explained some of the reasons why that is. And I think that this is an excellent first step. I would also encourage the school district to reconsider or to continue to look at the possibility of utilizing what I would describe as unutilized space right now. I know the town staff has surveyed, I surveyed at least 5 or 6 times during school hours, at least 40 to 50 spaces that were vacant at the school district parking lot, particularly the faculty, I'll call it the faculty parking lot. I noticed that there was about 25 spaces dedicated to district office staff, and inquiring about the number of district office staff, I was told there's only 5 staff. So I'd hope that the school district would look at the possibility of spaces that might be available to try to deal with this issue. And I think the town manager described very aptly that we've got just too many students, too many cars, and not enough places to go, and they've chosen one of the most convenient spots to be in. I don't know if George was going to mention this story, but we actually had one enterprising student, as I understand, that actually visited Apache and began pruning some crepe myrtle trees to accommodate their car this fall. So I think that there's obviously a desire to use that space, but there's also a desire by the residents to use that space. And I expressed to our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee on numerous occasions a concern about the safety. And I think if you look at the Redwood High School parking requirements and regulations, there's a long paragraph there from our principal who mentions very clearly the concerns that the school also has about driving in this area, particularly at lunchtime when people are trying to get into short distance in a short amount of time. It does create hazards, and that's my primary concern. I think the reason why we need to try to do something to accommodate the students, but also accommodate those in Madera Gardens. I could speak more than 3 minutes on the subject. I spent many hours on this subject, but hopefully this will be a good first step, and I appreciate the staff for the work they've done thus far.
Thank you, Jim.
Hi, Charles Lee, 9 Monona Drive. I'm a resident in Madera Gardens. So I didn't really want to talk about the issue at hand because it doesn't affect me at my location, but I have been in many communities that have parking permits in Santa Cruz and San Francisco, and I think one of the biggest frustrations I had during that time, I understood it was protecting me, but doing paper copy, go down to town hall, get it, or even if they had mobile booths like in Santa Cruz, it was an issue for the residents and having guests. We live in a new era than those times. We have apps, so as far as administrative cost, not creating personal frustrations with town, I just hope that you explore something like Park Mobile and some kind of beta, or see if there's those type of systems that would make this much easier, where you could take a picture of a license and have that reported to your account, so that the management of it's a lot more facile and the communication to the department is a lot easier. So there's that for the town and enforcement of this policy, but there's also with the school, we're currently working with SFO looking at ways to maximize their parking in their parking lots, and they have app-driven, parking where they efficiently kind of are distributing the permits or the parkers to the open spaces and letting them know exactly where they are and when they're timed. You don't need a lot of fancy technological infrastructure built into the roadway. It's basically a cloud server map that has times associated that people can sign in, that maybe they explore issues like that to help maximize what they do have and maybe increase that. But I just wanted to throw that out there to muse, think about if there's possibilities for the town, and share with Larkspur and the police force as we adopt a new kind of enforcement, that there's new technologies, that we don't have to go back to older systems. So Thank you.
Hi, Stephen Murato, 161 Birch Avenue. Thank you for all the good work that you do. This is very well done. We are in support of the parking permits. Not ideal, but definitely, when I think about it, the most elegant solution to this problem at this point in time. I do think it's fine to take time with instituting the permits. The problem seems to get worse throughout the year as more kids turn 16 and get their license. So I think it's fine to maybe take till the holidays to make sure that this gets into place and not to put too much burden on the town. I do think it's a cost that the town should burden and not the neighbors of Birch and Apache and so forth and Lakeside. The other thing that I would be curious to know is why Larkspur did away with all the parking that was available on Doherty Drive. That's where many people used to park 20 years ago when I was at Redwood. And that has all been taken away, and it seems like the problem has been just pushed around. So maybe there are some more outlets for parking that maybe could be explored and being brought back, but I'd be curious to know why that was taken away. Last, I will also add that it seems to be that not just the student drivers, but some of the parents that use our streets as a way to drop off kids at Redwood can be a problem with hazardous driving. So my only suggestion there would be, in addition, which is a secondary issue and an issue in general around our schools and our streets in the mornings, especially when people are in a rush, is to still have occasional police patrol for those parents that are flying down Birch and Lakeside Avenue, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Grace Sievertson. I'm at 157 Lakeside Drive, and I thank you all. I appreciate all the fine work you've been doing. It's taken a while, and thanks. I have two letters here from two neighbors who could not make it. They're short, and I'm going to read them and then give them to whoever I have to give them to. So the first one is Dennis and Dorothy Jacques at 169 Lakeside Drive in Corte Madera. It says, Town Council, Corte Madera, California. Dear Town Council, we thank you for your help and totally support your proposed solution. The parking on our streets has been crazy and needs to be addressed by Larkspur and their schools. So that's Dennis and Dorothy Jacques. The other neighbor, who is near the neighbor I just read you the letter from, is Don and Ann McCann. They're at 160 Lakeside Drive in Corte Madera. So it says, to whom it may concern, we fully endorse the new residential parking permit in Madera Gardens for the following reasons. We can't park in front of our home during school hours, nor can our guests or people that come to work on various projects. We also have neighbors with many cars. The traffic speeds of some of the students is too fast, and children are going to school at this time. Most cars are single drivers because of their age. We do have a bus system that could accommodate them. Thank you for taking this situation up with your council. Let's try for a year to see if it works for everyone. Again, Don and Ann McCann. Okay, then my own comment is I would support a resolution, but I do have some input. One of the neighbors I was talking to who couldn't come tonight mentioned having this resolutions with the signs for a year and having to get permits, he said would be an impediment on his private property, I guess because of the issue of the permits. So somehow, when we test this for a year, and we'll see if Redwood High School has somehow addressed seriously the overflow of parking that's coming on our area, because at 157 Lakeside, my right down corner is Apache. It's very fully parked on both sides, heavy duty metal. So again, I just want to mention about after a year, seriously reconsider how Redwood is addressing this issue so it doesn't overflow into our areas. So that's my input. Thank you so much again. Take care.
Hi, Steve Stein, 203 Birch, and I want to add my voice to thanks for the staff preparation on this issue. It was extensive and very rational and very helpful. We don't need to consider this as a matter of first impression. Kentfield, for example, I don't know if that was already mentioned, has been doing this for many years. They have the 40-minute restriction as against the college parking. Now, we're talking about a population there that's considerably older, considerably more mature. We've noticed within the last year in particular the huge difference in impact, not just in the number of cars, but in the students and the student behavior and so on. They're good kids, but they're kids. And there's a lot of noise, a lot of litter, and many of my neighbors and many of your neighbors have had occasion to mention that. Beyond that, and I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but maybe perhaps not, you need not be at all defensive about what you're being asked to do. I believe if I rewrite your own ordinances, pretty much require some protection of residential areas. For example, your section 1808 says this, and I'm quoting, protect residential properties from the adverse impacts incidental to certain office, commercial, industrial, and public facilities uses. So if not this, what? You also have very severe restrictions, rightfully so, on home occupations. And why do you do that? Section 1808, a home occupation shall not generate more pedestrian, automobile, truck traffic, or parking demand than would normally be generated by a residence. Again, the same issue. If we can't operate out of our homes to generate more traffic, and I'm glad we can't, then why in the world should a school be allowed to do that? The one comment that was made today that I really do have to take issue with was the comment, unfortunately, by the principal of the high school to the effect that this is not something that was sudden and impactful. The change from the requirement to leave school or not to leave school for lunch hours hugely impactful, hugely. And please, Mr. Sondheim, I must tell you, if you think otherwise, you're kidding yourself. Please come down there and see. Well, I hope you don't have a chance to come down there because I hope this ordinance passes and we eliminate this. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing how this plays out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jim Gossel, a resident of Birch Avenue for 22 years. I have 3 daughters that graduated from Redwood.
Did they walk?
Yeah, of course they walked. and Bob Ravazzi will vouch for that. He knows.
Coached them.
Yeah, he coached them. Yeah, I made him walk. I'm against the way the map is drawn. I think the restricted area should be extended to the intersection of Birch and Lakeside. You don't prevent people from driving in and looking for spots in the unrestricted area. Then if they get here and they find out they can't park in this area, they're going to end up driving around through here. So you still have the traffic bar problem of driving through, and they'll be racing around. The other problem you have is you move the problem from the west end of Birch. You move the problem from the west end of Birch to the east end. And if I were in school now, I would park down here and come up the High Canal Path. And that way you're coming behind all the, the people's homes here in their backyard where they're not really seen. Where they're going through up here, they're out in the open. The handicap access is wide open. Everybody sees that. But if you get them to walk back here, who knows what's going to go on. So I'm against the way it is, and I request that you reconsider to redraw the map. And why not just block it off here for the whole loop?
So within the, I'm sorry, may I ask a question? Out of order a little bit. So within the dotted line?
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, so here's the intersection.
Yep.
And just extend this here and this all the way. And this is the High Canal Path.
Whoa.
But the High Canal Path is right here. So you just force them to park on the east end and go up the High Canal Path. Thank you.
public comment? Councilman, comments or?
Question, please, go ahead. Principal Sondheim, is there a possibility that there can be an increase in the number of carpool spaces permitted such that more students are in fewer vehicles?
Yeah, in fact, we have for a number of years guaranteed as many students will carpool as possible. We will make that many carpool spaces. So they are the first ones to get permits. And if we fill all the lots with carpool spaces, we will do that. So we very much want to encourage carpooling. Realize it is a challenge, as most people know, because the driving regulations don't allow students who haven't had their license for more than a year to drive other people, but we feel the same way.
Any chance you could get some food trucks? Because if the kids don't like the cafeteria,
So one of the challenges we have is we're also bound by federal nutrition guidelines. And so there are regulations around having food trucks within a certain distance to the school. So we don't currently have that option.
Okay.
Although our student nutrition services director has approached local businesses to look at ways to bring that food onto campus. Again, those that meet those federal nutrition guidelines and can be done in a cost-effective way, and it's a challenge.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, we don't have time?
No,
Go ahead.
I have two questions for staff. One of the public comments mentioned the Kentfield program, which essentially allows 45-minute parking for some of the blocks around College of Marin. Would that be a personnel nightmare to enforce? Is that a very expensive program to enforce?
Yeah, so we actually started this program based on the Kentfield model, and then in consultation with the police authority, talking to the chief, we want one-stop shopping. So in that model, you have to go out and you have to chalk those vehicles. You have to come back a second time to see if they're within the 40 or outside the 40-minute time zone. So you're adding extra trips, you're adding, extra time. And so that would be a problem for the police authority. You're really doubling the cost. You're taking resources, as some of the residents talked about. We want our officers and staff out there enforcing traffic laws. And so it would become problematic for us, and I think we would actually, in looking at it, we would have to add 1 to 2 police cadets to do this enforcement if we did 40-minute. We were looking at 2 to 3 hour parking limits.
Right.
And so we don't recommend that.
Right.
It would be problematic for us.
Okay, and another one, please. We're not regulating private property. We're regulating public property, right? We're regulating public streets, not private property, right?
That's correct. In the town of Corte Madera, that's correct. There's at the end of Birch, that cul-de-sac is private property. But Larkspur, again, in consultation with us and the neighbors, they will also be allowed to do this parking program. So, but I think that's what the reference was from one of the residents regarding the private property. In the town of Corte Madera, it's all public property.
Thank you.
I'll comment if you want. Okay. I think you guys did a great job on this. This is a very difficult problem. We've been hearing about this for a long time. I was at the hearing, I think on the 25th, whatever day that was, and certainly heard from the residents there, and I think this is a really, really good solution, at least a first step. We're trying it, and I think we need to do something, and I think this is a good idea. I just have one question. What do you guys think about the idea to extend it further down Lakeside? Is that problematic, or is that too big, or?
Councilmember Ravazio, I don't think it's problematic. I do think that this, I mentioned the walking time penalty that I mentioned. So it is not as quick of a trip to park at the corner of Lakeside and walk along High Canal Path. It's a bit of a trip to get all the way to the high school. But this is one of those things when I said be patient with us, allow flexibility, we'll make amendments. Within a couple weeks, we can respond. The green drawing that Rebecca helped me with and that's before you now is the first cut. If that doesn't work and we need to extend the boundaries, we will, but there's also that trade-off. Now we're involving more homes that need to seek more permits. The administrative cost goes up, the impact to the residents also goes up. So we attempted to strike a balance between the two. But I do believe that if we were to extend it, we would need evidence that it's being parked. And then we wouldn't just do it to that corner, because then you could just park on the other side of High Canal and be on Lakeside. So we'd have to extend it further down Lakeside, up Ash. We'd have to, it would be more in order to address the issue. But I'm comfortable with where it is now. I think Todd is as well. But we would respond if needed.
So if we were to pass this and it goes into effect within a couple of months, if everybody was parking on Lakeside,
we would change the boundaries.
We can just change it again and try again.
2 weeks. So,
2 weeks.
And this is something where, as this gets instituted, we're going to have staff at multiple departments evaluating this, talking to the residents, and we have a couple, and the gentleman that spoke last about his concern of expanding it, we'll include him to that communication tree. And if we have any problems, we'll come back immediately within 2 weeks with a resolution and expand it. But as Peter said, it's just not adding 30 extra houses. It's the town attorney's
There
looking
is
at
a
it.
nice simplicity of having the change at that intersection. Whether you're coming in through Lakeside or coming in through Birch, over the hill and down, it's kind of two signs.
Councilmember Kuhnhart, the problem with coming to this intersection is that you could then park here or here and get on High Canal and walk. You could park here and get on High Canal and walk. So there's no walk penalty to bring it to the perimeter to this location. You would need to include Ash. You would need to include a street that I can't read the name of and don't know the name of, as well as Lakeside further down. In other words, you have to make a walk penalty for parking in these other locations to access the High Canal path. So it's not actually, for me, a logical location to end. If, like I said, if we do have the issue, we would need to expand the boundaries, but we'd have to extend them quite a bit in order to prevent people from accessing High Canal there.
So we run the Council Crest issue.
Right, and so I think just, we want to implement this as quickly as possible to when this is ratified, right? And so as close to the school year, days matter, and so administratively, we think this is the first absolute, like the red zone, we need to, or the green zone, I guess I should say. This is absolutely based on walking distances. This is the first cut. We're going to have to, over the first few weeks of this deal, we're going to have to evaluate it and respond probably 1 or 2 more times. But to process all those applications and to enforce it and to make it streamlined as possible, you don't want to go too much farther than this in your first cut. I agree with everything that's been said. I think we're going to end up expanding this 1 or 2 times. But we just need to go in it with eyes wide open and know what we're talking about and expect that to happen. But I think this is a good first step. They're also going to move into Larkspur. Larkspur could potentially move into Corte Madera. We're going to have other things. We've looked at, you have the homeowners association where Rebecca lives, they have permitted parking, so that's okay. But you look at Council Crest and Chickasaw Court. There's not as much parking on the streets, but they could be impacted. But before you actually permit a neighborhood, you want to have that evidence where you know, without a doubt, that we need to inconvenience them and have them go through this process. The areas in green, we know absolutely without a doubt. Outside of it, I think it's open for debate. I think there's going to be a lot of changes as we go based on the response of the kids.
So then just to summarize, I'm completely in favor of this. I think we need to give it a shot. And Peter's the only one who's done this before, so I'm taking his recommendation. If you think this is the way to do it and we can roll and we can, adapt quickly, which it sounds like we can if we pass this, then it sounds like that's the way to go. So I would propose, I'd be in favor of going with this.
Thank you, Jim. So the first thing I want to say is I want to thank staff for jumping on this. I think we had a really serious problem materialize very quickly that requires a complex solution, and you guys did a great job of putting together this parking permit program, which, as far as I can tell, is a really high-quality permit program. So that's, you jumped on finding a short-term solution, and I understand that you guys are also still working on a longer-term solution. So thank you for your work on this and for keeping that process going. The second thing I want to say is that I really empathize strongly with the residents, what they've been going through in the past months, and also what they're being faced with now. Frankly, I wouldn't want a parking permit system in my neighborhood. I think what we've seen here, it is a burden, it's a hassle. And it's certainly better than having your neighborhood overrun where you can't find parking spaces and there's people driving in an unsafe manner on your roads. So I think it's clear that it's preferable in this situation, but I think it's unfortunate that it came to this. And I understand that there are multiple factors that led to this scenario, including changing parking conditions in the surrounding areas of Larkspur and Kentfield. Redwood getting a lot bigger. We heard that it's 50% bigger now than it was 8 years ago when I was there. And of course, policy changes at Redwood High School. I am putting a lot of emphasis on the longer term process that's got to happen here, because I don't think it's ultimately fair to ask residents to be subject to a burdensome parking permit program for something that they had no control over. I certainly wouldn't think it would be fair to ask them to pay for parking permits in this scenario. That's obviously a discussion for another time, but on balance, I support this as a short-term response to the problem that we're having right now, but I think the whole situation is incredibly regrettable, and I'm hoping that we're able to work together with all the stakeholders in order to find a long-term solution that is acceptable to everyone.
I support it. I have to confess, one of the things I enjoyed when I moved from San Francisco to here was not having to worry about permits to park on the street. And that was one of the blessings of moving to Corte Madera. And I regret that we're going to have to institute it in town, but I don't see any other alternative. So I'm going to support it. Any other council comments?
The only other one that I would say is that if somebody has just one car and a modest life and they don't want to have anything to do with permits, they can park in their own driveway. And they will not be required to have a permit to park in their own driveway. So I'm in favor.
Okay. So, a motion? Motions, I guess.
Yeah, then I will.
With amendment, or?
I will move that we introduce ordinance number 988 and the version that does not have red ink on the first page that was handed to all of us that was revised.
Okay.
Right, that's the one we want? Okay.
Second.
Okay. Call the roll.
Councilmember Bailey. Councilmember Kuhnhart.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Andrews.
Yes.
And I would also then propose introducing resolution number 32/2019 establishing, no? Oh, we've passed the ordinance first.
You've passed
Okay.
the ordinance on
Okay.
the second reading. When the ordinance comes
Oh,
back, then
okay,
you will
sorry.
introduce the ordinance. The ordinance is the skeleton for the
Got it.
program, and the resolution imposes the program and establishes a parking permit in this particular neighborhood.
Thank you.
So we can discuss the green line 2 weeks from now, if folks want to raise that issue again.
If you like, yes.
Okay. Good. All right, so I guess we go into the next issue, which is
5B.
5B, public hearing to review information, receive public comments, and consider adoption of Resolution 33/2019, ordering the abatement of a public nuisance by removal of hazardous vegetation at 220 Morningside Drive, Corte Madera.
And Mr. Mayor, because I reside slightly less than 500 feet from that site, the Brown Act encourages me to leave the room at this point and
Okay.
recuse myself. So that's what I'm going to do.
Good.
As
Mr.
long
Ma-
as I can have a cookie.
Mr. Mayor, before the council member leaves the room, I think, Mr. Mayor, did you want me to talk in general about each of the procedures and process for each of the three
Right.
proceedings that are coming forward?
Yes.
And I think it would be beneficial if Councilmember Kuhnhart stays for that piece, since it's applicable to the two proceedings for which you will not be recusing. You have three public hearings in front of you. This is an area where you sit in a quasi-judicial capacity, much like you would if there were a land use entitlement coming before you. And so you would need to disclose any ex parte communications that you've had. You need to keep an open mind and consider the evidence that will be put before you by the town and by any resident that responds, and that at the end you need to make a determination and based on specific findings about whether or not an abatement order should issue. In the first case, the staff report will go through in a little more detail because it's the first time you've looked at this in the statutes. When we get to the subsequent hearings, we'll be talking about the same statutes, and the fire marshal will go through those as well, again, but probably without explaining the background quite as much because you will have just heard it. But he will go through that process in each of those proceedings because, of course, we have 3 separate public hearings. If you have any questions about the procedure, I'm happy to answer them, or I'm sure the fire marshal would also be happy to answer them before we then get started with the first public hearing, and at which time I would suggest that Councilmember Kuhnhart go ahead and leave the room.
Okay, in terms of the hearing, will it be the fire marshal present for a certain period of time, the homeowner presenting for a period of time, public comment?
Yes, it would be the same sort of process you have for land use entitlement, and I think it's the mayor's prerogative to decide, but yes, you should have equal time allotted and a time for rebuttal. So we can default to the procedure that you use for land use entitlements if that's the recommendation of staff. And it would, again, be it's a very similar process. Obviously, the issues are quite different, but the structure is very similar, and you are sitting in again, not in a legislative capacity, which is the capacity you were just sitting in, but in a quasi-judicial capacity.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Fire Marshal Martin, would you like to present?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having me this evening. Today we're kind of in a unique situation here in the fire department. We're bringing forward 3 public hearings for abatements of overgrown vegetation on properties. 2 of the properties are undeveloped, vacant parcels that are kind of locked in between surrounding homes, and 1 is actually an overgrown parcel that is inhabited by a structure. So we're going to start off with 220 Morningside Drive, which is located on Christmas Tree Hill, which is within a designated wildland urban interface zone. The council in 2008 was presented a WUI code that provided a map that designated certain parts of the town that were at a high fire danger area, basically listed as a very high fire hazard severity zone. And this is brought or allowed, the way fire hazard severity zones are designated are usually through the state of California, through CAL FIRE, usually gives a map. However, they only select certain areas that are within or close to state responsibility areas, which is most of the time the watershed or unincorporated areas. When they develop their maps, they allow the local jurisdiction to go ahead and expand those areas based on local factors. Basic is climate factors, there's topography, and so forth. So we were able in 2008 to go ahead and expand the state map to go ahead and include certain portions of the town of Corte Madera, which is primarily all around Christmas Tree Hill, the Chapman Park area, and the eastern part of Corte Madera, which is the Prince Royal area. So that's a little background on where the WUI code and the WUI maps came from. As you are all aware, since 2015, we've all seen an uptick in large fires throughout the state of California, let alone here in Northern California. Recent example would be the Camp Fire that burned in 2018 that killed, I want to say it's 28 people. No, it's actually much lower than that. They killed 86 people with 14,000 homes destroyed and 153,000 acres burned. And that cost the community and the state $8.4 billion to extinguish, and the amount of dollar loss with the properties. So since 2015, fire agencies, especially here in Northern California, started seeing or improving their fire prevention inspections through properties that are located in the Wildland Urban Interface Code. In the Wildland Urban Interface. Since 2017, when the Tubbs fire came through Santa Rosa and actually burned parts of the community that were not considered Wildland Urban Interface zones, for instance, the Coffee Park area, that would be equivalent to the east side or the Mariner Cove area of Corte Madera. So it's just areas that aren't used to being burned. So since 2015, like I said, we've been seeing an uptick in these fires throughout California. They're becoming harder and harder to extinguish. And they're not necessarily being burned by a massive fire front that's coming through, but the ember casts and the ember showers that are being caused and generated by these fires. So these embers land on areas that are surrounding your home or on these vacant parcels that are undeveloped and overgrown, and then start smaller spot fires that then start burning through communities. Then once you start having communities and homes burning, you start having what we call an urban conflagration. It's no longer your wildfire, forest fire, it's now your intermix. So you have homes, tight roadways, difficult access, and so forth. So this property first came to my attention in October of 2018 when I was approached by a property owner who basically stated that this property had been overgrown and unmaintained for over a year, and that there may be some inner grumblings between the property owner family. However, we went ahead and in October went out and took a look at the property, said yes, it was overgrown, and tried to make contact with the property owner. Could not get a phone number or anything, access or email to them. So at that point in November, we sent, in November of 2018, sent an inspection letter, an inspection report to the property owner explaining what their hazards were and requiring them what they needed to abate. And that can be seen in, should be your attachment 6 of your staff report. And then in November, again, we received another call from a neighbor stating when the property would be anticipated to be cleared. And I told him that we'd given 30 days for the property owner and we should hear something back. If we haven't heard anything, we'll go ahead and move forward. By then, we were in the middle of December. Winter was here. The initial hazard was, or risk was gone, but yet the hazard still remained because the vegetation only had that much longer for it to grow. Basically, you add water, vegetation grows taller. And then in April of 2019, we went ahead and started a more aggressive inspection and program within the homes within the urban interface zone, where we, every home within the WUI zone received a letter, basically stating what our inspection requirements were and what our timelines were. Basically stated that they would be receiving a 2-page color flyer stating that in May, stating what their requirements were, and that was their first official notice of that they needed to remove their vegetation from around their homes. And that, I believe, the attachment of the flyer should be in your attachment 4. The letter that was sent out should be in your attachment 3. And that letter is dated April 3rd of 2019. So those were 2 letters that were sent to the property owner. We were kept receiving complaints on the property from the neighbors, stating that when were we going to go ahead and abate the property. Me explaining to them that the goal of the fire department isn't to initially go out, inspect, cite, and abate. Our goal is to try to teach a property owner or explain to them or educate them on what the hazards are and what they need to do to mitigate it. So in the fire prevention world, the number one tool that we have for us is the education portion. I always feel that education should be your number one tool that you use. And if that doesn't work, you try to re-educate, re-educate, re-educate. And unfortunately, there's certain times where you have to use that other tool in the toolbox, which is the enforcement tool. And this is kind of where we're at today. This property, I've not received any correspondence from the property owner since 2018. Nothing's gotten back. Our goal, like I mentioned, is to work with the property owners and try to have the properties abated. Unfortunately, there are certain properties that do need to get handled by, or going through the abatement process. And that's kind of where we're at today. We went ahead and inspected the property again in June 6th of this year to see if they had made any progress since our November letter, our April 3rd letter that was sent to every property owner, our colored flyer that was sent to everyone. And so it never came back to us with any response from the property owner. So June 6th, I sent them a copy of the inspection report that has images of the property, along with a letter stating that they're in violation of California Fire Code 490702, which requires any property owner that's within the wildland urban interface code, or within the wildland urban interface area, to maintain their property with 100 to 150 feet of defensible space. So that's kind of where we're at now. And so we haven't heard anything back since the June 6th letter. And then on July 8th, we went ahead and inspected it again. And at that point, the property was not abated. And that's when we went ahead and referred it to the town for abatement, following Section 904 of our municipal code, which outlines what we can deem as a nuisance hazard. And I'm ready for any questions if you may have them.
Okay. If we vote in favor of this, what are the next steps?
So the next steps from here is we've given a 2-week deadline to give the property owner an opportunity after today's decision to go ahead and abate the property themselves. That's been till August 23rd. If it's still not abated, then we have to go before a court, before a magistrate, and receive an abatement warrant to be able to step onto private property before we go ahead and clear it. Once we have that warrant, then we can bring a crew and bring them into the property, abate the property, and then we've got a few options that the council will have to make a decision on how to recoup our costs. Under Section 904 of the municipal code, it allows us to recoup all the abatement costs associated with this property. Right now, we've gotten a few estimates to clear the property, and they're anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500 just for the work itself. That does include any staff time.
Okay.
And so at that point, you have the option of sending the property owner a bill to recoup our costs. And if they do not pay the bill, then 2 other options that you have is to either place a special assessment on their property tax or to place a lien on their property.
Okay. And in terms of the costs, Teresa, you need to research how strictly or broadly we define costs.
So the mayor and I spoke before the hearing, and he asked the question of whether or not staff time, including attorney time, can be added to the cost, and that is something that I would need to take a look at. So in connection with moving forward here, it may or may not be the case. I suspect it is, but it may or may not be the case. And then, of course, there's the question of whether it would be the pleasure of the town council to impose such costs on to a resident at this point. And so I do believe that staff is hoping to move forward with this expeditiously. I think this is a new process to the town. It's certainly not a new process, but it's a new process here in Corte Madera. One thought would be to have staff move forward with costs that are more of the direct costs associated with this and not the legal costs associated with this, but then to consider in the future, in future abatements, whether it would be appropriate to bring forward the additional costs associated with bringing an abatement proceeding and obtaining a warrant and moving forward with abating the property.
And in terms of the warrant, how long is it good for? If we got one on the 25th, would we have to implement it within a week, 6 weeks?
We appear before a court, and we would be making a recommendation about how much time we need. And so there would be, we would work with a court. The court would give us ample time to do it. It a little bit depends on when we go in and when the court hears this. So we'll take a look at that and move it forward. I think the fire marshal can probably speak to how long he would anticipate the project to take. And of course, that depends on contractor availability. So we would be requesting an amount of time that builds in enough time that we can get the job done, even if the contractor it takes a little longer than the contractor thinks.
Given that the property is uninhabited and you have not heard back from the property owner, is it reasonable to believe that the property owner may not be aware that this action is taking place and has been taking place?
That is always a possibility. We've sent letters to the property owner and address of record. It's under a trust, which is in Escondido. However, speaking to neighbors, I hear that there's two siblings within this trust, and apparently they're having a disagreement with each other, and one trying to see who's responsible of maintaining the property. So they are aware of it from hearing from neighbors and talking to them, and I'm not sure what's going on between the two siblings in this property. From what I've heard, one of the siblings wants it to go to abatement so they can take control of the property. So it's an unfortunate case, and we don't like getting in between neighbors and family disputes. However, with the amount of vegetation that's on the property and where it's located on Christmas Tree Hill, it is my recommendation that it be abated. Also, because what we've been seeing is within the homeowners insurance industry is several homeowners that live within a wildland urban interface zone are losing their insurance policies. So you could potentially have an entire 5 to 6 neighbors around this property have their insurance dropped just because of this one parcel.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
No questions.
Okay. Anybody?
Public comment time?
Well, does a property owner, first, are you done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir, I'm done.
Anybody from the property owner want to make a comment? So I guess
No public comment.
public comments now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jordan Silber, 210 Morningside Drive, so I'm an immediate neighbor to this parcel. I want to thank, first of all, Fire Marshal Martin I'm not the original complaining neighbor, but I'm on the other side. It's, I think, 232 Morningside that brought this to the fire department's attention, but I've met with the fire marshal on site and appreciate all the services that you've given to us. This is a really overgrown property. In our opinion, my wife and me, and I know I share the opinion of the immediate neighbors, I mean, it is a fire hazard. We live in a new day and age where you just kind of can't let this stuff go anymore. This is a property where I think the facts that were recited are essentially correct as we understand them. One of the representatives of the trust was very proactive annually about coming up and clearing it. We've been up there about 8 years. He would come, every once a year at least, if not twice a year, and do it himself basically with his family members and clear it and haul it off in a U-Haul or something, get rid of the brush. But a couple of years ago, he stopped coming, and the email communications we've had with him, he basically says, hey, I'm not going to come anymore. It's a trust matter. I'm not, he tried to develop the property. He had a planning commission approval to build a big house there. It ended up being that he didn't get the job done, and I think he's basically told us in an email, like, I'm not coming there anymore. So we would really appreciate the town council taking this action to protect the fire safety and the insurability status of our surrounding properties. Thank you.
I'm Karen Gerbosi. I live at 111 Parkview Circle. I'm miles from this property. I'm not even sure where it is. However, so I know I'm speaking as somebody that's not proximate, but I am speaking as a citizen, and I want to be sure to make my point that I think we should be harsh with these people. I don't think that there should be any more leeway about being, oh, well, you know, they're working stuff out. And I don't care if you get between families, siblings, trusts, whatever. You know, I was one of 3 when we inherited our property. And so if I was a neighbor and there actually got to be a worst freaking case scenario, and it came down to, well, we were going to clear it 3 months ago, but then we wanted to give these people 3 more months or 3 more days or 3 more whatevers to respond, I would be, you know, litigation city at that point. So I just want to speak as a citizen, and as if I was one of those neighbors, I would not have any empathy, sympathy, or any other of the words that I would get from my thesaurus about that. And I think you should, like, unload on them.
Nancy Barner, 203 Morningside. I'm in favor of adoption of this resolution. I just have a concern about the amount of vegetation that would be removed, which is fine with me, but every winter in our area, there's heavy rains and washes down debris and stuff, clogs up the drainage in a couple places, and creates a big lake right there around the fire hydrant. Public Works has been great in the last, say, 10 years, I guess, in working with that, but this is a new situation that would be arising. So I'm concerned about that, what would happen in the rains. And will there be any vegetation holding that land? It's very steep property. Thank you.
Any more public comments? Ruben, will you be able to? I have a question.
Yes.
Her question about clearing the brush. Are we going to be able to maintain most of the roots?
Yeah, so when we remove vegetation on a hillside, we have to play that happy balance between slope stability and fire hazard. So we play that balance every day. So we'll have vegetation will remain on the hillside. We're not clear cutting it. The trees are going to remain. The grasses are just going to get cut down to about 3 inches. The primary problem there is they've got about 6 to 8 foot tall Scotch broom on the property. And so most of that's going to be removed. And if it's a steep hillside, the recommendation we give is to leave the roots within the system, within the ground. That way it keeps that soil stability.
But we'll have to go back every year for 2 or 3 years to
Exactly.
cut the broom.
Exactly.
Okay, good.
My goal is not, like I said, we're at the point where we have to abate this property. I hope that we're not back here in a year from now trying to abate the same property again. The goal is to try to have the homeowner or the property owner to do it themselves.
Okay, good enough. Okay, any other questions?
Just 2 comments.
Okay.
The first would be that this seems pretty cut and dry to me as both a matter of the law and a matter of public safety. And the second is that I think, as we've heard it, there's also the fact that the status of properties has a direct impact on the surrounding homeowners and the surrounding residents and their ability to insure their properties. So I think it's clear to me that we have to abate.
I have clients who lost their fire insurance on Chapman a couple months ago. Brand new house, and it was just pulled, and they had to go and pay a lot of money for new fire insurance. We have a problem in town. I think most of the people realize we have a problem. At our meeting a month ago, we were told that in our Chipper Days program, which has been going around all the neighborhoods, we have gotten, and now I'm sure we're well up past this, but 4,000 tons of brush has been removed by homeowners. So homeowners want to do something about this. The people of the town want to do something about this. And I think we have to do something about this immediately. So I am all for this.
Okay, good. I support it as well. Anyone like to make a motion?
What is the motion? hang on.
I would make a motion to adopt resolution number 33, 2019, ordering the abatement of a public nuisance by removal of hazardous vegetation at 220 Morningside Drive.
I'll second.
Councilmember Bailey. Councilmember Kuhnhart. Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Andrews.
Yes. Okay, Buena Vista, so,
Wait for David to come back in.
yeah, we'll swap out councilman.
Yeah. I'll wait for you to introduce. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
You need to introduce it?
The next item is public hearing to review information, receive public comments, and consider adoption of Resolution 34/2019, ordering the abatement of public nuisance by removal of hazardous vegetation at 23 Buena Vista Avenue, Corte Madera.
And I need to recuse myself from this as my property is less than 500 feet from this lot. Thank you. See you in the next one.
We need a bigger town. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I bring to you another abatement hearing. This is similar to the prior one. This is located at 23 Buena Vista Avenue, or correction, Buena Vista Avenue, which is located in the Chapman Park area of town. This is also a vacant lot. It looks like it may have or had remnants of it being developed a while back. From what I could gather historically, there may have been a fire on the property before, and the property had been leveled. There is still remnants of a type of wooden deck or foundation pad out there. So this lot, as before, these property owners also received all of our notices. We sent out a notice on April 3rd. On April 3rd, letting all of our property owners that are within the Wildland Urban Interface area know that what our comprehensive inspection program is of properties and what our procedures are. It basically told them that they'd be receiving a 2-page colored flyer on May 1st indicating what our defensible space requirements are around your property, and that our inspectors are going to be coming around on June 1st, and that's what their deadline was. And that any property found not cleared after June 1st would get a 2-week or notice, a violation, and then 2 weeks to clear it. Then anything not cleared after those 2 weeks would be deemed a nuisance or handed over to the fire marshal's office, and then I would deem it whether it be declared a nuisance or not. This property, we began receiving complaints on it in June of 2018 of overgrown vegetation with a lot of brush on it that were impacting the neighbors and the property surrounding it. People that were also calling, or neighbors around there, say that this tends to be a popular spot for teenagers to go out at night because it's vacant, undeveloped. There's a nice little parking pad, or a nice little pad out there with some chairs where they go out and either drink or smoke. And the big fear is someone being careless with either lighters, lit cigarettes, or whatever they're doing out there that could potentially start a small fire that, if it starts on the wrong day, could, as we've seen in Northern California or in Sonoma County, can get catastrophic fairly quickly. So that began in 2018. We went ahead and sent them a letter in June of 18 and an inspection report stating what they needed to do to comply. We continued.
June of 2018?
Correct.
So a whole year ago.
Correct. It was June 25th of 2018. Was the first letter that we sent to them of overgrown vegetation. We continue to receive complaints from a number of residents, not just the same person, but several people, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. We got to that point. So we went ahead and re-inspected the property and sent them a follow-up letter. Second letter was in August, giving them another 30 days extension. So at this point, we're at 60 days that they've been notified to clear the property. And at that point, I had given them 14 days to go ahead and clear the property. After in August, we continued to receive complaints, no response, unable to find the property owners. And then it just kind of fell off the radar with everything else happening with the campfire and everything last year. And then we continued to receive complaints again this year. I had placed this property on my list of properties that are non-compliant. Actually having over 2 years of being non-compliant in the area. And then sent them our June 6th inspection report, letting them know that their property is non-compliant with our defensible space requirements and that they had 15 days to go ahead and clear the property. So I gave them a timeline date in which they had, I believe, until June 21st to clear the property. The property was again inspected on July 8th after receiving more complaints. And at that point, we referred it over to the town for a nuisance abatement.
Are you getting answers from the owners?
No, I'm not. None whatsoever. Whether no return mail, the last letter for our posting was on the 26th of July, and we sent them a registered mail, which has not been returned to us. So we're assuming that they received it. I know one of the other properties that is being brought forth today received the letter because I've received confirmation from them. So the mail is working. We're getting there. It's just I've gotten no response whatsoever.
So in the last case, you said that you were able to gather from neighbors sort of an idea of the situation and a notion that the property owner was aware of the situation. So I'm just curious, in this case, have you been able to gather any information about indicating whether or not the property owner might or might not be aware?
No, I haven't gotten anything from either property owners, neighbors, or anyone.
Okay, thank you.
The address it was mailed to, is that the same address where the tax bill is sent?
Yes, that's correct.
Do they pay their taxes?
That I didn't check. But it's the same address that's under the county's assessors and within Marin Map and what we have here.
Be interesting to find out if they did pay their tax.
You should send them a love letter and see if they respond to that.
So.
That'll be after the abatement.
Can I ask, do you feel that the species of plants and trees on the property are particularly pyrophytic or?
Yeah, so especially with this property, as you can see, it's all dead, tall grass. That's where all your fires are going to start. So the embers start on what we call in the fire service a receptive fuel bed, or basically kindling. Anytime, just imagine an ember as a flying matchstick. And wherever they land, they're going to want to start small little fires. And this property here is ripe and ready to burn.
Okay. And it's in the middle of a neighborhood.
That's correct. It's surrounded by homes on all three sides.
Okay. So, anything else?
No, the same as with the other one. The fiscal impact on this project would be the initial upfront cost for the town to abate it. The cost that we're getting back on this one's like $3,500 to $4,000 from contractors. And then any other costs would be up to the council on whether we want to put the fully burdened rate on them.
Would any representative from the property owner want to speak?
Any neighbors?
Any neighbors? Okay.
I suggest you call for public comment generally, whether they're neighbors or not.
Okay, public comment, including neighbors?
Hello, I'm a neighbor and a part of the public, so I'm happy to comment. I'm here representing my wife, Marin. We live on 21 Buena Vista, which is directly downhill of the property. So we have unique visibility of the property. We happen to look and enjoy looking at the property. It's beautiful, and we have a camera that points that way too because of concerns of fire We have a camera that points that way. We mostly just look for kids. We notice a lot of kids out there. There's like a little gazebo deck type thing, which is wooden, entirely wooden, and is flat. And so kids like to go out there. And luckily, I've never seen anybody smoking, but it keeps us up at night. So it's actually caused quite a bit of like undue stress on us. We think about this all the time. We think about, what would happen if there was a fire. Like I have a little checkbox to-do list where I'm going to put a little sprinkler system on the roof so I can like stand up there and like douse a fire if God forbid that would happen. So we're in favor, and if I didn't mention this before, thank you for coming out and looking and treating this seriously, because we view this as a serious issue, regardless of the insurance. More so about our home and feeling safe. It's really about that. So we are in favor of this. One other thing that I wanted to mention about this property is that it is not just a square lot. It's sort of teased. So actually, our property is bordered by two sides of the thing. It goes back and then to the downhill side of our property. So we feel especially encroached on by the risk of this. I go out there with my weed whacker and whack my grass and try and whack along our fence to try and fight it back. So there is quite a bit of vegetation that's also growing into our property as well. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Hi, Nathel Bellany from 45 Buena Vista. So we're just 2 houses up from this lot, and thank you so much. We've talked to the fire marshal over the last couple years, but this is actually the 3rd year that they have not done any abatement on this property. It's a huge concern with our neighbors. Our other neighbor directly next to it is a single lady, and she's highly concerned, and I've talked about it with her, kept her in contact. I know she's talked to the fire marshal also. This house did have an illegal in-law unit, and it did burn, I think it was about 18 to 20 years ago. We've lived there for, I think, almost 22 years. The owner passed away. He was in a nursing home at the time. They did end up needing to, so much damage had been done to get rid of the house. That deck has stayed there. We have seen kids there, and I've seen cigarette butts there on the deck. So it is a big concern. And I know it's a concern of the neighborhood, and I appreciate all your time and effort into it, but just wanted to give you a little bit of background that this is the 3rd year that they haven't done anything. Before that, they were cleaning it every year, so I don't know what happened.
Can I ask a question about that, please? Before that, do you know who was clearing it, and were they sending a crew, and was it
A
sort of
crew
several
was
times a
going
year?
in, and sometimes the lady, I believe she's a real estate agent who inherited the property. It ended up going through probate when the owner passed away. She was a real estate agent, and I believe at the time the story was that she was saving that property for her daughter when she became of age to build a home there. The daughter's got to be in her 30s now, so I have no idea what happened. I haven't seen the owner in many years. I know there have been issues with her, with putting up a grotesque orange fence around to try and block people, the deer or what have you, without any permits. There have been issues with her before, but I haven't seen her in a long time. Thanks.
Question. When you're clearing the brush, would you also take care of the remains of the deck, or would you just leave that? Or
Our goal is to remove the deck
okay,
and remove anything that's combustible on the property.
all right. Okay, good. Any other public comment?
Could I ask, is there any officer available in the town who could explore with the owner the possibility of actually developing the property or creating another suburban owner-occupied unit there? Is that an option at all? Do we have any mechanism for doing that?
Yeah, I think always in situations like this that come up, just thinking about it, but yeah, the staff can absolutely reach out and engage the owners and options for our, zoning and opportunities. I think it's worthwhile, just hearing the issues and from the residents. These have been longstanding issues,
Yeah.
and it's an opportunity for us to solve two problems. So yes, absolutely.
I think that might be a useful long-term thought, other than, otherwise, we're just going to be doing this every year, right?
All right. Any other council? Anyone like to make a resolution?
I would move that we approve Resolution 34, 2019, declaring 23 Buena Vista Avenue a public nuisance and requiring the property owner to abate the nuisance by August 23rd, 2019.
Second.
Councilmember Bailey? Councilmember Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio? Vice Mayor Beckman?
Yes.
Mayor Andrews?
Yes. Okay. And the next up is a hearing to review information and receive public comments and consider adoption of Resolution 35/2019, ordering the abatement of a public nuisance by removing hazardous vegetation at 2 Endeavor Drive, Corte Madera.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you again for allowing me to present or bring forward to you a property located at 2 Endeavor Drive in Corte Madera, which is located on the east side of town, on the hillside community. The property physical location is at the intersection or the corner of Endeavor and Prince Royal Drive. This property is developed and does have a 3-story home on it with a resident within it. This property first, I started receiving complaints in October of 2017 during the Tubbs fire, when we were getting all the drift smoke. We started getting phone calls from homeowners and residents stating on the nature of the property and how overgrown it was. We went out and inspected the property in October of 2017, and then issued a letter and hazard notice to the property owner stating what they needed to do to clear their property in order to maintain proper defensible space around their home. Unfortunately, the property owner was non-responsive and did not correspond with any of my mailings I sent out and wouldn't answer the door when I would knock. There was an abandoned vehicle in the driveway, so it kind of assumed that the state of the property, that there was definitely someone living there, they just weren't maintaining it. In 2018, we continued to receive more complaints, which was in July of 2018. We went ahead and inspected the property again, in which the condition of the property worsened from the year prior. I went ahead and sent another notice to the property owner with a letter stating which code sections they had violated and what they needed to do to maintain proper defensible space. In August, continued to receive more complaints on the property, went back out and did a secondary inspection, sent another letter to the property owner, and did not receive any response. At that point, I was able to contact the property owner's son and able to talk to him to see what the state of the property is and what they can do, and wanted his mom to contact me, in which the property owner did contact me in August after the second notice and stated, yeah, I'll take care of it. I'm just having a hard time finding a contractor. Like I had mentioned earlier in the evening, that our number one goal is to try to get compliance through education, and we work with homeowners, especially in properties that are inhabited, to try to come up with a plan. Because I understand that a lot of homeowners within Marin are property rich, dollar poor. They are on a fixed income, very limited resources, regardless of what their property is worth. We tried to put her in contact with some senior services to maybe assist her. Unfortunately, she did not do that. we can give her the amount of resources and send her to the correct locations. But if she's not engaging, there's nothing we could do. So that was at the end of 2018. Beginning of 2019, continued after our letter went out in April. Homeowners began clearing their properties around May. And we continue to receive complaints on this property. And as you can see with the images, the state of the property continued to worsen. The vegetation got higher, the grasses died, and it became more of a fire hazard. During the process of noticing this property owner, we went ahead and issued another hazard notice in June. And then again, and sent a letter with it basically stating you have 2 weeks to take care of the property, or it will be turned over to the town for an abatement. So we gave her till July 1st to clear her property. It was inspected again, I believe, July 8th, in which she had not done the work. And that's when we went ahead and referred it to the town for a public nuisance to get abated. Within that time period, while we were preparing these staff reports, I've been contacted by the property owner's son, who went ahead and began some of the work. However, as of yesterday, he returned my phone call and stated that he has done basically as much as he can do, and what needs to get cleared on the property is above and beyond the resources and capabilities that him and his wife have. So he said, go ahead and do what you need to do with the town and go ahead and refer it for abatement. They've cleared about 20 to 25% of the property, which is basically just along Prince Royal, just that one frontage section, which is right here on the picture. You can kind of see on the image. Their goal is to eventually move their mom out of the property and get her into some senior assisted living, because this property has become to a point where it's non-manageable both for the family and for the resident.
On Sunday, brush had been cut, but it hadn't been picked up. There was a dumpster in the driveway.
That's correct. They've got a couple issues with the property. One is a hoarding concern with the property, so our code enforcement officer is working with the family on handling that side of it. And I've been working with the defensible space side of it since 2017. They did cut the brush. We went ahead and put him in contact with our resiliency coordinator to try to utilize the town's chipper program. And so they've already agreed to whatever's been cut. When they're in the area, they're going to come by and remove it. However, everything else still remains. The hazards still remain on the property. And sincerely speaking with the property owner's son, they are overwhelmed and have gotten to the point where they can no longer handle it.
Would they be amenable to just maybe working through our resilience coordinator and just have her take care of the property for them?
It probably could. We would have to talk with the resiliency coordinator on whether this falls within that program.
I know she wouldn't want to necessarily get involved in abatement, but if it's sort of a step before the abatement.
Correct. That would have to be a decision on the town manager and the council.
Okay.
The recommendation of staff is to issue an abatement order but it would still provide until August 23rd for the property owner to abate. So that would give the property owner some ability to coordinate with the town's coordinator on the chipper program to see if the property owner can do it by that deadline. So there is an opportunity to see if it can be done that way, but still allow the council to move forward with making sure that the abatement order is issued and to allow the fire marshal to move this forward if that can't happen.
Okay. Yeah, my impression is that in terms of scheduling contractors between now and month end, a lot of them are enjoying vacation, so.
And they're busy. They're busy doing this kind of work.
Yeah, we've given a list to the property owner and their son, and The son has received these notices going all the way back to 2017.
Can you say which senior service you put them in touch with?
There's two of them. One is through Fire Safe Marin. They have a grant program that they can go up to, I believe, $5,000 to clear property for senior citizens, but it's got to be engaged partly through the citizen.
Right.
That's one, and I think I'd put them in contact with someone at the county. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check on that.
There are companies or nonprofits that full-time help seniors figure out their next step and get them into assisted living. Senior Settlers is one that I happen to know of, and they can be very, very helpful in circumstances where there's a difficult communication issue.
Yeah, I, in my opinion, and my recommendation, similar to the town attorney just mentioned, I believe we should move forward to keep this as an abatement, just because since 2017, we've.
I'm not in disagreement with that at all. I think that.
But yeah, I will contact the son and give him some resources. I know he's in the process of getting a voluntary conservatorship for his mom and to try to get her into a better living situation. It's just one of those unfortunate situations that we see with our elderly population, that once they start getting into the hoarding side of it, it gets to the point where it becomes overwhelming, and where do I start?
Yeah.
And once they do start, it's just too overwhelming because they don't see a dent in their progress. And I believe that's the case with this property. It's gotten to the point where it's unmanageable by the property owner, and that's what's gotten us to today.
Good enough. Any further comments or questions?
No questions.
Anyone want to make a motion?
Excuse me, we need to
I'm sorry.
see if there is a property owner representative and then take public comment.
Okay. Property owner representative? Public comment? Okay.
Margaret Bandel. I live at 180 Prince Royal Drive, which edges this property on the downhill side on Prince Royal. This property goes around the corner. I know you've been trying since 2017, but I've lived there 30 years and I've never seen it cleared. And it's gotten worse and worse for 30 years. And now the problem that I face is that it's a very steep uphill. There are dead pine trees which are dead and in a fire would fall onto my property and my roof line. Every year when the rains come and little pieces of the property, trees, shrubs break off, I send my landscaper over and clear it a little space. Sometimes I have to clear it off of my shed that's on the side there, and every year, my landscaper is out there now actually, we edge up a little more and more over the retaining wall because it's ugly. And I have to look at it all the time and spend my money clearing it, and I appreciate you're doing something. I have never complained before because actually, when I first moved there and it was bad, I was told that the lady, and I have spoken to her from time to time, and her son were involved in the fire department. I thought they would be taking care of it. I didn't know I could complain and get a result from it, actually. But I really urge everybody to do something about it because it impacts my property every time it rains, and if there was a fire, it would be right on top of my house. It's all dead trees. They're not even live anymore.
That's very significant testimony.
Anyone want to make a motion? Move to.
Can I just say one thing first?
Sure.
Thanks. I just want to say that although it's clear that it needs to be abated, I do think that the fact that there's a hoarding situation there is indicative that the resident may have a mental illness or maybe a psychological disorder or just some sort of distress even, which I think creates a more sympathetic situation. And so I would just like to see if there's a way that we can assist the resident and possibly help defray some of the burden. I think maybe there's a system or a program to be established here in helping residents who are disadvantaged in some way or another, who would find an undue burden or are incapable for some reason of abating their properties. But my point is just that I think depending on what's going on with this resident's personal situation, you may be able to present to them all the resources and all the civil services you can, and they may not be in a position to avail themselves of that. So I would just like to explore if there's a way that we can sort of help them abate if they're unable to. That's all.
That's probably a topic. Could we agendize it for the next meeting, perhaps?
We can certainly do that. I would just tell you that informally, we do have that in place now, and we use the chipper program through our contractors as we abate as we work through areas and neighborhoods. So that's something we can do, and we have a few week, time frame to work on this, so staff will work on that. It is informal. Our criteria is similar to what the fire marshal talked about. It's based on the circumstances on a case-by-case basis. I think this meets the criteria, so.
Okay, well, if nobody else has anything to say, I would move that we approve Resolution 35, 2019, declaring 2 Endeavor Drive a public nuisance, requiring the property owner to abate the nuisance by August 23rd, 2019.
Second.
Councilmember Bailey, Councilmember Kuhnhart,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman,
Yes.
Mayor Andrews.
Yes. Okay. And I guess the next item up is 6A.
And I need to recuse myself from this item as well because I live within 500 feet of one of the pavement areas. Thank you.
Okay.
Yourself from discussing the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The item before you deals with authorizing the Public Works Director to award a construction contract. I believe, well, they're right there. Copies of the contract template that we use are before you, and they're available at the back as well. So this is the contract we're referring to. We did put this project out to bid at your direction, and we received responses from 4 potential contractors. And per the uniform construction details, we are recommending that we award the bid to the lowest responsible bidder. That's Gelati Brothers for $1.37 million. And just to bring to your attention, one thing we noted in the staff report is that the lower Chapman Park neighborhood has been undergoing what I would call an undue level of burden. There was a PG&E gas replacement project there that lasted about 18 months. There's a sewer replacement project there. And then when that sewer replacement project is done, the pavement is the last piece of the puzzle. So we've been working with the neighborhood as best we can to kind of ameliorate the level of impact that they've dealt with in terms of construction, and this is the last piece of the puzzle. This will hopefully be done here in the next few months, and then they will have sound infrastructure below the surface and at the surface of the roadways and sidewalks, and so they should have a peaceful couple of decades ahead of them.
Until an MMWD pipe bursts.
We actually have decent levels of MMWD infrastructure at this location, so it's not like
Excellent. Great.
Marina Village, for example.
Beautiful.
So that's it. That's the item before you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Is it safe to assume that this will be accomplished expeditiously? Because I remember last year's work didn't go so well, but it wasn't a gelati.
Yeah, we had a number of problems with the last pavement contractor, and we continue actually to have some. We're working those through. We have good relationships with all of the bidders and certainly with the lowest bidder, so I'd like to assume it as well, but of course we never know.
Okay. Any other questions? Any public comment? You scared them off. Anyone interested in a motion?
I would move that we authorize the Director of Public Works to award a construction contract for the 2019 road rehabilitation project, project number 18002, to the lowest responsible bidder.
Second.
Councilmember Bailey, Councilmember Kuhnhart,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio, Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Andrews.
Yes. And where does that get us? Okay, I guess manager reports.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just a quick verbal update per the agenda on the 5G small cell wireless technology issues, including the recently adopted Marin County ordinance and policy for 5G small cell installations in the public right-of-way. Marin County recently passed an ordinance. As you know, the town of Corte Madera is involved in litigation appealing the FCC small cell order. As of January, we're one of 86 entities across the nation involved in that litigation, including the County of Marin. Staff-level discussion with the Public Works Director, Planning and Building Director, and the town attorney, and myself, think there's a lot of merit to what the County of Marin did, being involved in the current litigation along with the County of Marin on this order. So we've been evaluating that ordinance, and staff is basically working toward bringing an ordinance very similar to the County of Marin's to this council for review at the next meeting, so on August 20th. So we still have some work to do. As you know, there's a lot of legal questions with the ordinances that have been passed recently regarding this issue, and we just want to, as we've always said, we want to be thoughtful in what we do. We want it to be something that we can enforce or follow the proper procedure, and we think this ordinance has some merit at this point, and we're going to bring it to the council on an expedited fashion. So it is not on the draft agenda, but it's something we feel is time for you to consider at this point.
Who exactly has accepted or passed that? The county for unincorporated areas?
That's correct.
Anybody else?
The county, specific to this ordinance, it's really, as you know, San Anselmo, Petaluma, Mill Valley started passing urgency ordinances at the time. With our discussion, we didn't feel, quite frankly, a lot of the points in those ordinances were even legal. And so we went to the area of litigation. We thought that was a good starting point. We've been evaluating this as staff and legal counsel since this has become an issue. The County of Marin's ordinance is really, I think, and Teresa can jump in there, is different than the others. I think so they've taken a little bit of a different approach, and we think there's some merit. There's still some questions we have, and we continue to vet those. But we think it's time to draft something and bring to this council for consideration.
So next meeting would be the first reading?
That's correct. And then the question for us would then be, we did, I believe, cancel the September 3rd meeting. So there would be some question of process and time. Would we want to have a special meeting, or would we actually hold that council meeting on the 3rd, single issue item? And so there'll be some discussion for us to think about at the next meeting. Timing-wise, if it's something that you feel strongly about that we should proceed with, we'll have to have a discussion about that second meeting when that happens.
Yeah.
Because I think if we go this way, I do think there's some urgency. We should consider that. And I want to be careful because I don't want to get too much off topic. This is just an update, but I think that's the path that staff is going. And offline, I'm happy to answer any questions individually. The second one, it is on the draft agenda. I just want to let you know, after Councilmember Ravazio's comments about the PG&E, shutting off power kind of issue, we've taken a lot of time to really push out information regarding this topic to the public. Rebecca and Lorraine have done a really good job. We've actually invited PG&E to the next meeting to give a 15-minute plus. It'll probably be a little longer, but it's important presentation on what's going to happen, on what they're doing, what they're working on, and a follow-up from the workshop they had in San Rafael last week. And the last item, I just want you to know, staff has been working toward bringing the potential of a sustainability committee to the council for review, if that's the way you want to go moving forward. I think there's a lot of issues, especially with all the work that Peter and his team is doing, and Adam and his team. It may be time to form that committee in advance and start working through some of these issues to support our programs moving forward. And as well as the council said, maybe merge a couple committees at some point. I think there might be some opportunity there too. But again, we're working towards that. I've asked Lorena, our administrative analyst, to kind of start with Sausalito's model. They have a pretty good model. And so to use that and draft kind of their model and bring it to the council at the next meeting for discussion and consideration. So that's what staff is working on at this point. Thank you.
Good. Let me see. The only things I have to report is on June 27th, I signed a letter addressed to Dianne Feinstein supporting her bill to repeal the FCC 5G rules. So I would have brought it to council for approval, but it, you know, the topic and the sentiments in the letter corresponded to what we had previously discussed at council. So that's it. So any other reports?
New Hampshire was beautiful for 3 weeks. This Sunday, there is a special Pacifics show and a suggestion that people bike to the ballpark using the new bridge that goes over the Corte Madera Creek. And I think it's going to be a kind of cool public thing. I don't have any reports.
All right.
Just one thing to report, attended a CMSA meeting on July 9th. CMSA continues to be a very well-run agency. One of the things that they spoke to us about, staff gave us a presentation on their asset management system, which is they use incredibly complex software to track not only all of their hardware, like, you know, their code generation engine and all the various pumps and things. It goes down to every individual component of each one of these things. I'm talking like screws, nuts, bolts. It's incredible the level of accuracy with which they track their hardware. So I was very impressed by that. Another cool thing that CMSA is doing is they are taking some of the unused space in their large corporation yard and leasing it to Marin Airporter to park some of their buses in the corporation yard there. So I thought that that's a cool example of a public agency sort of making the most of what they've got to benefit and advance the public interest. That's all.
Nothing to report.
Oh, I take it back. I do have something to report. That is that the Transportation Authority of Marin is narrowed down the field of the new executive directors to 2, and the final interviews are being conducted momentarily. And I will be taking forward to Transportation Authority of Marin the question of the possibility of increasing their crossing guard budget so that we could get at least one more here in Corte Madera to repair our crossing guard problem.
And yellow buses.
And
yellow
buses, yes. Yellow
Those
buses
were
are
two
getting
things they promised us to get our support.
Yeah.
And they promptly welched on the deal.
David just reminded me of one thing that I forgot to report. Also, I attended in my capacity as an alternate a TAM meeting last month, and the most exciting thing to come out of that meeting was that they awarded a contract to begin assessing, or I guess it was for like preliminary design or a conceptual study or something for the direct connection between 101 and the Richmond Bridge. So I think that's been long seen as sort of the linchpin of our horrendous traffic issues on Highway 101, and I was very excited to be able to be present for that step.
Thanks.
Vote for it.
Thank you.
Very good. So, anything else? Adjourned?